Welcome to Global Nuclear Associates Cyber Culture webinar. My name is Mike Barron. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of GNA. Here with me today is Keith Mosier, our Vice President of Innovation Services, and Dr. Ken Ferguson, our Vice President of Advanced Technology. A little bit about Global Nuclear Associates. We're based in Chicago. GNA is a full-service engineering, consulting, project management, and R&D company. Our specialty is innovation and creation of the unheard of, next phase technologies and processes that enhance, optimize, or provide solutions to long-standing problems and emergent issues. GNA Associates are recognized worldwide and have contributed or managed optimization projects, large and small, impacting some of the largest mega projects around the world. GNA is an association of industry professionals that are responsible for having shaped the energy industry to its current state. These iconic executives, engineers, scientists, project managers, and researchers have come together to bring their average of 30-plus years of experience to create a powerhouse team. GNA uses advanced engineering, implementing the most cutting-edge technology, both crossover and scratch designs. GNA has also developed and patented some of the most advanced forward-thinking tooling, robotic, and structural devices being used today. GNA Associates extend from national laboratories to specific research facilities, fabrication companies, original equipment manufacturers, and universities worldwide. GNA was born from the nuclear energy industry and continues to consult with energy utilities and general industry, including original equipment manufacturers, governments and their agencies, including the U.S. Department of State and the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency. A key area we've been asked to look at has been security. One of our focus areas has been cybersecurity culture. Here to present to us is the leader of this project, Dr. Ken Ferguson. Ken?
Thank you, Mike. To the audience out there, we want to thank you for your investment of time in this webinar. We really appreciate that time is a valuable commodity. GNA is enthused that this will be valuable to you as we navigate through the role that culture plays in effective management of cyber intrusions and related impacts. Here at GNA, we have experience in meeting challenges that are referred to as slaying the dragon. Effectively combating cyber welfare certainly fits in this category. We'll begin this presentation with a sports anecdote that works for any business. A former baseball player was quoted as saying, "When there is a fork in the road, take it." That ambiguous but insightful message is certainly true of cybersecurity. Think of a flashing sign at the end of a road, cyber danger ahead. Now what would you do? Our premise is organizational culture is the bridge in which a necessary trinity of attentions needs to be integrated. That is technology, work process and management, and people. The transformation into a cyber culture has challenges, but they can be well defined, with commitment to implement effectively being the ultimate key to success, as well as a vigilant, permanent attention. This webinar provides a walkthrough of the concepts of culture and related transformation, and provide a phased approach framework for cyber-relevant attentions and content. Included will be an example of a real cyber exercise that has been shared with us, as well as providing you with background information regarding status of cyber threats as varied, significant, successful, and growing. We will discuss key elements and attention to what we refer to as cyber infrastructure. We will talk about a gap in attentions, meaning the need to involve the full workforce in a cultural manner. Transformation is an element of success that is difficult, but is a path that we can define and be implemented, and we will talk about that. We will also talk about the status of the current situation regarding cyber threats and their successes to date and the prospects for the future. We will talk about the GNA support team and the collaboration we anticipate to initiate with some of the audience members out there in terms of a culture development related to cyber. We will define a first step we called Phase 0 to really define the focuses for this attention. And then we will talk about next steps. You can talk about culture in a lot of different ways. If you Google it, you will find too many definitions. But as well as any definition, it's really the fundamental attentions that determine how each individual in an organization thinks about a certain fundamental need for an organization to attend to. A cyber culture would be a necessary element of vigilance and permanent attention to the threat of cyber intrusion being successful and the related impacts. We think of a cyber culture certainly as technology-oriented and technical attentions, but also much more. And we will be addressing the much more as well as the technology aspect of the attentions of a culture. Talking about the threat status, we'll just cite some numbers out there. The attack numbers are in the millions. Attacks can be costly in terms of dollars, millions of dollars. And you add the two or you multiply the two, and the cyber costs are growing and mounting into the trillions of dollars. How does that impact what we deal with in our daily operations, our daily society functions? It touches everything. Here are just some examples. Fundamental power plants and electricity that's needed for societies to advance and prosper, as well as many other different kinds of businesses. These are just examples that you can read in perhaps any week in any newspaper as being victims of cyber attacks. There are some obvious impacts of cyber success. Homeland Security and other governments of the federal of the U.S. have identified some more definite targets that have occurred. Power plants, the infrastructure elements such as water, banks, insurance companies can impact safety and the public, but it could also impact the operations of any organization, its equipment, its systems, its information. It can impact employees as well as the public. And even in cases where there may not be a hazardous or chemical release, the economics of a cyber attack being successful on a business can be death-threatening, if you will. Corporate reputations can be at stake if cybersecurity is not addressed and managed correctly. Now, in terms of is the problem not under control? Well, another parameter is many of the boards of directors of companies, large and small, are very interested in cyber security and what does it mean to them? How is it being managed? Is it being managed? And as you can see from this PowerPoint, much less than a majority of board members are pleased with the way things are going in terms of cyber control. And in fact, the acceptance of current approaches is diminishing slightly, at least for the current information we have. So what distinguishes cyber attacks from other attentions, past and present, and maybe in the future? Well, there's a broad range of cyber attacks, very highly sophisticated technology, as well as incorrect usage of emails, which we will get into as an example. As we said before, the numbers are growing, and perhaps uniquely, this problem will not be going away. If you're in an engineering company and you have a problem, you fix it. And maybe in the future, you improve a continuous improvement approach to the economics or the technology. But in the cyberspace, for every cyber attack that's successfully met by defensive technologies, we have malicious intent out there that will just try to increase or change the threat. So uniquely, it's a permanent threat to an organization. it will not be going away. It's a problem of not solving, but always adapting. And there's also, the kind of the definition of risk is to minimize risk. Zero risk is highly improbable in a lot of situations. So to manage this kind of risk, we not only fight it with technology and win the technology war in that sense, but also for events, let's say, beyond the design basis, we have to accumulate that knowledge and respond to that as well. Such is the case in the nuclear industry, with the response to Fukushima being what's called a flex approach, a flexible solution that addresses a broad spectrum of possibilities, but also goes beyond what is maybe reasonable to design against. Now, again, one of the uniquenesses perhaps of cybersecurity, another one is it is very exciting in the sense of newsworthy. It's been called, some quotes I've seen, technological mayhem. It's been called the perfect weapon. And it is a professional as well as a hacker set of crimes out there that's being perpetrated, as I said, almost a daily basis. In terms of trying to address this technically, there's been some good surveys done with large companies that have concluded a couple of things. One is that what's called the IT people, the information technology people, and the OT people, the operational technology people, the designers of pumps and valves and operations and things like that, just aren't communicating enough on what to do about cyber. Another statistic, more than half of those operating personnel have never been trained in cyber, another challenge we have to meet. And another conclusion, just another example, is there is a shortfall of people who are trained to train people on cyber. I read recently that over 300,000 openings are out there for cyber experts. So with all this challenge of what's going on, what needs to be done, what is being done, what is really necessary as we move ahead? Well, what we can see and observe is there is a analytical risk assessment attention. If you look at the periodicals, if you look at what is being offered, it is very technology oriented, and it is a very strong and needed element of technology warfare being met by technology defenses. What we are observing, however, is also there is not the workforce commitment in terms of the total sense. And what we're talking about in terms of navigating that gap is a cyber attention as a cultural element, essentially the entire workforce being accountable, motivated, and enthused about the positive role they can play in effective cyber management. So the end state is you evaluate, you attend to, and you're capable of being a real productive part of cyber intrusion management and minimization. The light bulb, if you will, that goes off, can go off in somebody's head about this issue is if you approach a nuclear power plant, a commercial nuclear power plant, you'll often see with a lot of pride hundreds of thousands of accident-free hours in the workforce. This is before you even get into the plant. And for sure, that has been achieved because of a lot of analytical work that identified risk and designs and operations that take care of that risk. But also, it is the total involvement of the workforce from the day they get into, the day they're hired, to every day they're operating as an employee of that power plant. There is an attention to nuclear safety. And in our minds, you can view cybersecurity as the next nuclear safety. And there are other industries certainly that have this kind of attention to safety, the petrochemical industry, some manufacturing companies, et cetera. So it truly is a total commitment involving a lot of different skill sets, involving a lot of different attentions, depending on your job titles. So in terms of what we're talking about culture. We're talking about essentially everybody thinking of cybersecurity as a way of influencing the organization's success in the management of these kinds of risks. What we're talking about is a transformation. A culture is a permanent, everyday activity of vigilance. It's much more than continuous improvement. It's starting to think about something that was never thought of before by a lot of individuals that constitute the workforce. It's a real leap of change. It's more than a big project. Big projects are often doing big things that you have done to some degree before, and maybe on a bigger scale or a somewhat different scale. This is a quantum leap. And as much as it's a big change and a lot of attention to cyber, it can be viewed as a persuasive activity of the workforce. And we'll talk about that as we go on further. We're asking people to think differently. That's a big change. Transformation is even tougher than change. Change is doing things you're familiar with better. Transformation is things you haven't done before. The keys: communication. It is not difficult to think through and understand what is necessary for a culture to change. The key is consistent, persistent implementation and sustainable attention. As I said, culture is permanent vigilance, and that's what we're talking about here for a cyber culture. A little bit of detail on why change is tough. And again, these are not earth-shattering points, but it's just for information so we can share the same understanding. It's uncertain. What are we changing to, and why are we changing it to it? The other issue would be, what does this mean for me and my job responsibilities and my future with the company, etc. Individuals may have new responsibilities in working situations with people they may or may not have known before. At the top, the organization may have to shift in investments in the resources, whether it be technology or people. New skill sets may be involved, and new training for those skill sets may be needed. Another issue is, how does the organization, has the organization changed successfully before? This is a kind of a tough change situation, transformation. Has a company attempted big changes in the past, and how have they done? Do they need a new starting point? Have they done it well so they can move on to culture in security space done with confidence? Questions that need to be answered, certainly, for any individual company. So again, to summarize what we're doing here, and add a couple of other points. We need to plan, we need to communicate, we need to implement. Certainly as we go along, we have to monitor, change as necessary. Some of these points are consistent with what we call program management rigor. This is not only technical work and training work, but it's the process of defining it clearly, managing it to a budget and a time frame so that things are accomplished as intended. Obviously, an important thing about this, company and corporate specific, is what are the metrics of success? How do we define success? Certainly, that's a corporate or organization dependent thing, and it may depend on the current condition of the company. Obviously, what we're saying is culture is a big folding in of people, and this includes not only the workforce, but also senior levels. In fact, that's where it starts, in setting the vision and the big changes that we're talking about, including resource shifts. And at some point, it is proper in terms of the detail to get the workforce actually involved in defining the details of the activities that need to go ahead and to be part of this change and cyber culture enhancement of an organization. It's been called having ambassadors, champions, sponsors, all levels of the organization believing in this and using their influence to spread that belief in an organization. Another element of if we communicate effectively, if we implement effectively, and we have the culture in place that we want it to be, how do we stay on course? There are a variety of threats. Again, some good thinking and brainstorming will come to a list like this, but again, we offer this to share kind of our thoughts or our examples. One is a lack of persistence in pushing ahead this initiative. There may be organizational drift in terms of new and unexpected surprises to an organization where they need to do new things in new ways and new budgets that hadn't been anticipated, and perhaps in conflict with the changes that were identified for a cyber culture change. Another element, as I mentioned before, if you tried change before, what are the lessons learned? If you've had success, leverage that. If you had lessons learned, be sure that they're fully documented and addressed with the entire workforce. Who's going to do these changes? Well, everybody is, because it's a culture change, at least the way everybody thinks about their job. But how to get this indoctrinated, or the organization motivated, or who does what about this, the roles and responsibilities have to be clearly identified. Again, this is not the only thing that's going to be happening in an organization. In fact, part of the problem is probably most people are fully employed, know what they think they're doing, and how here's an overlay of a cybersecurity culture initiative. Priority constraints, they have to be recognized and managed. And again, getting back to communication, if it isn't effective in terms of who needs to be skilled in what new capabilities, and just the message gets miscommunicated or not communicated, this initiative goes nowhere. In fact, it's very disruptive in a negative direction. And again, in terms of at the top, the leaders of an organization are the source of this change, or the vision of this change, and have to be part of the momentum of this change. An example of how this culture thing can be disrupted internally, and perhaps at just because of a lack of knowledge of what this cyber world is all about. We've been informed that not this year, but last year, a Valentine's Day exercise was initiated at a power plant, and the comment was a kind of a neutrally entitled email went out to the entire organization saying, "Happy Valentine's Day. If you respond to the attached, there's a special gift waiting for you." And let's put it this way, enough of the organization went after that gift that the top-level management was very disturbed about this, because, of course, anytime you acknowledge or go into an unidentified attachment, you're a hacking potential. So again, alarming number of employees, certainly if not fully educated and motivated, can be an unanticipated problem related to a cyber attack, and the implications of success in that area. A couple of slides now on the where are you. The first comment on this slide is where are you geographically, and where we're going on this is cybersecurity is an impact on large companies, small companies, single located companies, and multinationals. Clearly, if you're a company that has a variety of locations around the country, around the world, that requires kind of a special vigilance in terms of having a consistent approach to cyber management at each location. In terms of what is needed, as with much of this, is what are the current conditions in your organization. And of course, for every location, that merits its own assessment of where they are, and how the question will be is, how do you get this in a continuous and effective approach across all locations? And we, part of our team that we've taken a lot of time to develop over the past months our experience in multi-site situations. And as a typical approach with any client, we would collaborate, we would exchange ideas on what has worked and what hasn't to go into a specific path that makes sense for a specific corporation and their locations. The second aspect of where are you is kind of where are you in terms of your cyber situations. Have you given attention to cyber attentions in your organization structure? What is your current approach to attending to cyber situations? We're going to be talking to what I call the cyber infrastructure. Are your infrastructure elements properly connected to cyber? Is there a history of change in your organization? How have you handled it? Our experience is how an organization or a corporation has handled change may depend on what location you're talking to, what organization in that location you're talking to, and what level of workforce you're talking to. The senior executives, as an example, may have a different feeling about how change went compared to the majority of the workforce. That has to be understood. There's no right or wrong answers. It's capturing the current condition. Here are some relevant infrastructure areas that are certainly relevant in general and certainly relevant specific to cyber. Let me take training as an example. How do you train your employees? Is it effective training? Do you use technology appropriately? Do you avoid lecturing in big audiences as opposed to small groups that can communicate with each other? So in a process sense, you look at training, is it working? The second thing you look at is, from a content point of view, is training properly addressing cyber attentions? If not, what needs to be done? So again, it's a current condition assessment. And likewise, all those areas. How do you communicate? Are you attentive to program management? What about processes, et cetera, et cetera? And certainly specific to the cyber situation is how do you handle security practices? So again, what do we do about all this? What does a corporation, a company, a location do about this? Well, as I said, the first thing to be done is assess the current situation. And the best way to do that is a combination of people who have been involved in changing organizations, as well as the experts on your company, which is your employees, the senior executives, etc. So again, the attention is not only how things are getting done in general, but how things are getting done in response to the cyber content and context. And so talking about how much is this going to cost, well, this phase 0 or first step gives a roadmap into what's being done well, what needs to be improved probably, and perhaps a prioritization of the timing and investments to make those improvements. Obviously, the attention most critical is to your most critical assets, whether it be people, equipment, information, etc. So when talking about how GNA would approach this, over the last months, we've really focused in detail on developing a very strong set of people interested and experienced, without question 10 years of experience or more for each, in addressing the infrastructure areas that are important to cyber. It's a combination of everything I said before, plus of course cyber security subject matter specialists. So we're there, we're experienced, and we provide kind of the big picture of what's going on in change that is relevant to cyber culture. We have now a workforce that we have a resource base of dozens of senior consultants who can go to. They're experienced in transitioning many different organizations and all the benchmarking and lessons learned that come with that. We view how we can help not only in the very near term, but in the long-term vigilance of a cyber culture, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Part of that vigilance is a commitment to be with you in the long term, from the beginning to several other stages. Our team, research-based consultants, already have ownership in what we're talking to you about today. We're not going to take somebody off another job who doesn't want to go to that job. And again, in terms of the details, we want a program management attention and vigor to the tasks and activities that make up the scope. Again, I'll just summarize quickly. Phase 0 would be a collaboration to identify the current condition of cyber attention at an organization. The deliverables, the input will be what are the specific needs and the proper readiness to advance, to improve. I'm not going to get into any of the details on that slide, but I just will say that the additional element of that slide is the fact that there would be a cyber exercise element to add another element of how the current condition of an organization is today regarding cyber. Now, again, to put visually what we're talking about, the far left-hand part of this is the front end, what we call phase 1, the initial phase or phase 0. And I want to emphasize the back end, which I would call long-term sustainability. And that is only accomplished with some specific actions. Specific actions will be that the success that was achieved in earlier phases is continued to be achieved. Changes to the threat of cyber are continually folded into your cyber attentions. And significantly for many industries, how is the regulatory landscape changing to what constitutes cyber compliance? The nuclear industry, of course, has a lot of that underway. Other industries may have less involvement right now in the regulatory aspects of successful cyber management. That has to be factored in continually. And so we will be there to help you to do that, to either independently assess how you're doing, or have a more detailed involvement in that long-term sustainability. So in summary, cyber is a fundamental issue. It's a permanent issue. It's needed vigilance, and that is the definition of a cultural need. We've defined it's a transformation. It's not easy, it's definable, but it needs persistent attention at all levels. The best team is a combination of your people and our people. Phase 0 can be defined and take a matter of a small number of weeks and be valuable in determining what goes ahead for the future in phase 2. And as a result of this webinar, we hope you're interested, and we're ready to discuss collaboration, roles, and responsibilities for phase 0 scope and proposal. Wanted to thank you for your involvement and investment of time. We know we enjoyed this. We hope it was valuable to you. Thank you.